Hey, you rates. Just wanting to show you another video, just a little bit of a repetition one. We went through this worksheet in class today, just in case you weren't here. But if you were, then this is going to be a good opportunity just to make sure that you're all over it. So feel free to pause the video at any time if you want to, you don't quite catch something or anything like that. But I'm going to go over the organelles just to make sure that you're on top of it, because chances are you're going to be tested on it at some point. Okay, so the first one that I want to get into is it's called the cell membrane. Okay, so that's the thing that goes all around here. Okay, now my tool's going to do a bit of a funny thing here, but that's okay. So the cell membrane is basically just acts like the bouncer at the pub or something that you probably don't know about just yet, but when you do, there'll be a guy at the front that sort of makes sure that everyone's in the correct dress and everything like that. The cell membrane is basically the same thing, so it makes sure that things that go in and out of the cell are things that the cell wants to have inside it. Okay, so it's called selectively permeable. Now, permeable just means that some things get through, but other things don't. Now, so it's not completely a complete wall that doesn't let anything in, but it lets some things in that it wants, and some things that it doesn't, it likes to keep out, and just to make sure that the cell's healthy. Okay, so it goes all around the entire cell. And all the organelles that are inside that cell, and it's very flexible. It's probably one of the largest structures in the cell. And remember, with plant cells, another thing that you need to take into account is that there is definitely a cell membrane in the plant cells, even though most of what you probably see in the diagrams is going to be a cell wall. Underneath the cell walls, it has the cell membrane as well in plant cells. So it does the same job in plant cells, but just remember that it's always going to be there. Okay. Now the next one is the famous mitochondria. Okay, so this is this structure here. Okay, and there's another one over here. Okay, and what they are, you can tell that they're mitochondria because the little envelope around here, and they've got sort of a little wavy structure in here. Okay, now they're sort of what we call little sac-like organelles. They're inside the cell. They've got their own DNA, which is pretty weird, but they're the ones which basically just allow the cell to make sure that it powers itself. It does a thing called glycolysis, which I'm not going to go into today, or at all in year 8, but what it does is it's responsible for a lot of the respiration of the cell, make sure that that the cell doesn't run out of energy. Okay, so very important there. Now, one weird thing about mitochondria is that, yes, it's got its own DNA, which is quite a strange thing already. And before the cell divides, the mitochondria kind of, what's the word? Mitochondria replicates itself because it gets worn out during respiration. So they're some of the, they provide the energy, but they're also some of the hardest working things in the cell, if you're going to look at it that way. The next part that we're going to look at is called the Golgi body. So that's this part here. Okay, Golgi body. Sometimes you might have heard me refer to it as the Golgi apparatus. It's the same thing. Golgi apparatus and Golgi body are the exact same thing. Okay, but it's this part over here. Now, that's basically their sac-like structures, and what they do is they've got sort of two sets. And they form lysosomes, and they're really responsible for sort of packaging everything around the cell and outside of the cell. Okay, so they're basically just the Australia Post almost of the cell. Okay, so that's the Golgi body here. The next part, and you'll always find this around the nucleus, it's called the endoplasmic reticulum, or ER. Now, that's basically just another kind of sac-like structure, kind of like the Golgi apparatus, or the Golgi body. So that's around here. Okay, so just keep that in mind for this part here. If you'll notice, this diagram has got two different colors. A lot of diagrams will just have it one color, okay, but you'll notice that we've got some dots on this one and no dots on this one, okay? So those dots, remember, they are called ribosomes. So the ribosomes decide whether or not the endoplasmic reticulum is going to be called one of the two types, which is rough endoplasmic reticulum, in the case with ribosomes, or smooth endoplasmic reticulum in the case without ribosomes. So sometimes it'll be the same color. This diagram's two different colors. I'm not really sure why, but I like the look of it anyway. But yeah, just keep in mind, if it's got dots, it's the rough endoplasmic reticulum. If it doesn't have dots, it's the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. Okay, and the dots are, of course, ribosomes. Okay, now we're going to go through, I'm just going to touch on one piece here. So there's one over here, and there is one over here. In a lot of diagrams, they're a lot smaller than this though, so keep that in mind. These are called the lysosomes, okay? So the lysosome. All right. Now the lysosome is an organelle, it's found within all cells, and it basically contains these things called hydrolytic enzymes. So big word, but all that means is basically they're sort of the things that break down the stuff that the cell doesn't want, or the things that the cells use just to be repackaged into new things. Okay, so that's the lysosome. Next up, we have big guy, the big man on campus, the nucleus. That's this thing here. And most of the time, if you have a look in a cell, like in the onion cells we had a look at under the microscopes the other day, the nucleus is really probably the part that you'll see the most of, okay? Except for obviously the cell wall in the onions that we saw. But most of the time, you'll see a dot inside all these cells, and that's probably the nucleus because it's the densest part of the cell. Now, so the nucleus, it's generally sort of the central part of the cell, and it's the central part of the cell for a reason, because it's, you know, the boss of the cell. It decides what's going on in the cell, and it contains the genetic material that makes up sort of all life that we really know about, called DNA. Okay, so that's the nucleus here. Now remember, don't get these two things mixed up, but inside the nucleus there is an organelle. Sorry, it's not an organelle in its own right, but it's called the nucleolus. Okay, so just make sure, you don't need to know anything really about what the nucleolus does. I will tell you, for those people that do want to know, that it's mostly responsible for creating ribosomes. But the nucleolus, very different to the nucleus, but it sits right inside it. Okay, and the little squiggly lines around here, we call them chromatin, and they basically make up the DNA. Okay, and the DNA really is the genetic material, like I was talking about before. So that's really, the DNA is really good for making sure that everything is running smoothly, and basically for creating proteins, and that's the thing that makes up you and I, really. And so you'll find that DNA in plant cells, you'll find them in animal cells, and there's a pretty good reason for that. Okay, so DNA, you know, it's made up of DNA is the thing that really makes you and me, and the blade of grass outside the classroom makes them that as well. Okay, now this last thing, one thing that you need to be aware of as well, guys, is around here, one of these two things, I'm not sure which one this diagram points to, but here, oops, okay, so this one is a ribosome. Okay, so the ribosomes also basically float around the cell, so you'll find them around the cell, you'll also find them attached to the endoplasmic reticulum, and that makes the endoplasmic reticulum the rough endoplasmic reticulum, as we remember. Okay, so the last thing that I'm going to touch on, guys, so these parts here I'm not going to go into because you don't need to know them straight away, that comes sort of later on. But the last thing that I want to touch on is that we need to remember there's three things that are not present in this cell. Okay, so this is an animal cell, it's not a plant cell. There's three things here that it is missing. Okay, now the first thing goes around the outside in a plant cell. If this were a plant cell, we would see it around the outside, and it's a very, what we call a rigid structure around the outside, and that's called the cell wall. Okay, so if you see a cell wall, you know it can't be an animal cell, it has to be a plant cell. Second thing, inside here, so there'll be little things around here and around here, and normally in diagrams these things are colored green. All right, now these are one of my favorite organelles, and they are only found in plant cells, and they're called chloroplasts. Okay, so they're responsible for the plant to be able to photosynthesize, you know, make energy, get the energy from the sun, and that's very, very important for plants. It's also very important for us as well, because we can't photosynthesize. We don't have those chloroplasts in our cells, so we need to steal that energy that the plant has. So that's why they're one of my favorites, because they're pretty important for all life on Earth. Well, most of life on Earth anyway. And the last thing that you need to take in mind, the thing that is missing from this diagram, is, of course, the large vacuole. Now down here, you might see a tiny little vacuole, or I'm not really sure which one in this diagram that is, but it's one of these two ones. Now you'll find small, tiny vacuoles in animal cells. So you're not going to find a very big one, only really tiny ones. But in plant cells, you're going to find a big vacuole. Looks like a massive swimming pool in the backyard, and it's sitting there just around the nucleus. Okay, it's taking up a huge amount of space. In fact, most of the time it probably takes up more space than the nucleus in a plant cell. Okay, so and that's basically just for hanging onto water and a lot of other things that the cell requires. It's basically just there for storage. It's a big storage unit of the plant cell, but we don't have those. So we are obviously not plants, which is a pretty good thing. Now, so just remember those three things that are missing from here. So we've got the cell walls, the chloroplasts, and the large vacuole. And inside the cell, guys, just to recap, I'm going to go through. I wonder if you can do this with me. We've got here, that's a thing called a lysosome. Get rid of that. Now these over here, what are these things called? See if you can test yourself. Those things are called mitochondria, of course. Over here, okay, looks like an endoplasmic reticulum, but we know it's probably not, okay, because it's not right next to the cell next to the nucleus in the diagram. And there might even be multiple of these hanging about in a cell diagram, depending on what's in the test that you get tested on. Okay, so but it does look like the endoplasmic reticulum, but it's not going to have little dots on it because that is, of course, the Golgi apparatus or the Golgi body, either one. Okay, so we've gone through that. Now we have, I'm going to differentiate these two. Okay, so that one that the white thing is taken over, this is called the rough endoplasmic reticulum. Okay, and what about over here? If we see the endoplasmic reticulum with no ribosomes on it, that must mean it has to be the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. Okay, keep that in mind. All right, now, and in the middle, we have the nucleus. Okay, so the nucleus, the big guy on campus, the guy who decides what's happening around the cell. It's responsible for hanging onto the DNA, which is very, very important. Okay, but to be honest, every single part of this cell it can be seen as being the most important part of the cell. Even though the nucleus is the big guy on campus that calls the shots, all the other different organelles around the place could not. If they were gone, the cell wouldn't be able to do what it wants to do. Okay, it won't be able to survive with any of these missing. All right, even though that the nucleus contains the DNA, doesn't mean that the rest of the parts aren't as equally important. And the second last one, there's one more that I haven't touched on. I wonder if you can guess while I say what this is. Which one do you think I've missed out accidentally? Sorry. So we've got around here, we've got the cell membrane. Okay, so keep that in mind. That's the good thing, that the organelle that decides what stays and who goes, what the cell wants, what the cell doesn't want. Okay, so it's what we call selectively permeable. Okay, and the last part is that I've forgot to mention before is this kind of gel-like fluid. Okay, so around here, it's all around here, all this kind of light green stuff. Okay, that is called the cytoplasm. Okay, so remember, cyto means cell, and we've got the cytoplasm, and that's really a jelly-like stuff. Think about a cell as basically, or an animal cell at least, as being sort of some jelly with some pieces of fruit floating around in it. So those pieces of fruit will move around a little bit, but not a huge amount, and the structure, if you can call it that for an animal cell, is maintained a lot of the time by these organelles, and especially the cytoplasm. Okay, so it's what we call a fluid matrix of the cell, and it has other substances in it as well, such as all of the other organelles. It has enzymes in it, has water, and the volume's always fixed, and what we call, for those that sort of want to extend what we know about it, it has a definite pH, which is a very weird thing, so it's got a set acidity level. All right, so that's it for the cell, for the animal cell. Now, hopefully I'll be able to do another video soon about the plant cell, but it won't be as long because there's only a couple of small changes, and I've probably spent a lot of time on the plant cell already. So watch this, check it out, and let me know how you go and whether or not you're starting to find these videos helpful. Okay, guys, well, I'll see you on, I think the next day we have science is on Friday. Okay, have a good evening. All right, see you guys.